Top five books that I've listened to over the last couple of years. If I would have read them, I probably would have put them down because they were either super content heavy, super dry, or I probably wouldn't have been able to get through the content. Number five, it is a storybook, and I personally like reading this in a hard copy book a little bit more than I do like listening to it. But just because of the story of the book, I freaking love this book. This was as soon as I read it, actually in like a hardcover book, it became my number one book that I've ever read, up until reading a couple of the ones, which I'll actually go over in this. But the book is called The Alchemist, and The Alchemist is the story of someone, trying to find his treasure, trying to find, what meaning of life that was meant for him. And it just really stood out to me quite a bit just because, listening to a story like this, listening to someone going through a journey, being able to persevere through a lot of different challenges was great to be able to listen to because I had already read it, I had already known this story, but somebody going through it at a different pace than I was reading it was absolutely phenomenal. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Number four on my list, and this is a book that if I was reading a hard copy of it, I probably would have put it down in the first couple sentences because it's super dry. And I am not a super dry reader. I like to be able to go into a book that's exciting, that's motivating, that has all the generic, you rah rah, or a good story to it. But this book, super dry. I'm super glad I listened to it the first time because otherwise I probably wouldn't have picked it up beyond this point. But the book is called A Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson. And I've listened to this book now probably 3 or 4 times. There's no real specific subject because it is a short history of nearly everything. He goes all the way from he didn't know what the difference between a proton and a protein. Wanted to know every single thing from an atom to the universe to dinosaur bones to a lot of different things, and it's really really fascinating knowing about different things like at some point people had no idea that dinosaurs even existed. And he talks about in the book when the first dinosaur bone was dug up and what the heck they did with it. They had no idea. They found a hip bone in a stream bed in New Jersey, and they're like, "What the hell is this?" All right, they had no idea that anything that big had ever existed before, and it was really fascinating to be able to just like see different timelines, see when different things were invented, see what the impact was. It was just really really fascinating, and I love it. It's you learn about clouds, you learn about the universe, you learn about atoms, you learn about space exploration, you learn about sea exploration, about different species, about everything, and it's so fascinating. Listening to it, I would highly recommend. If you are like me, listen to it. Don't read it. It is super boring if you would read it. I don't know. I've never tried it before, but I'm sure trying to read it would be torture. Number three favorite book that I've ever listened to, and this has actually become my number one favorite book ever, is a book called Wild at Heart. And Wild at Heart is a man's book. It's a man's book. This is like a book from your grandfather. So with Wild at Heart, it's really just talking about a couple different things that a man needs to live. And I'll give you a couple of them. So one of them is a mountain to climb. And I feel like every man needs this in their life, and the book kind of goes into this, but it's something to achieve, something to grow towards, something to overcome. And it's really fascinating. If you know me at all, I'm a very emotional person. I like to be able to get involved with a lot of things. And it was kind of funny. I was listening to this based off a recommendation from Mason Eddy, and I was listening to this on a treadmill one time when I was at the gym, and it started talking about a lot of different things that were going on in my life, and it's fascinating how books can do that. But I started actually like crying on a treadmill in the gym, and I was just like, "What the heck is going on? Like, I shouldn't be thinking like this. I shouldn't be feeling like this. Like, I feel like people thought that I was a crazy person or like running was super hard for me or something like that on the treadmill." But if you are a man out there and you're watching this video right now, Wild at Heart, pick it up too. It's a great read, but listening to it, you can get through it. You can listen to it 3 or 4 times in a week, and gosh, it digs deep into the soul of a man. Number two favorite book that I've ever listened to on Audible is a book called Crushing It. And this is a pretty popular book now. It's by Gary Vaynerchuk. And Crushing It talks about all the success stories that came from his original book, Crush It. So Crushing It is a little bit more, in my view, it's a little bit more relevant today. He talks about some, predictions back in the day from Crush It, but with Crushing It, it's all the applicable things that people have done or are doing to see massive success in their social media game, in their personal lives, in their finances, in a lot of different areas. And I feel like Crushing It is a phenomenal example of how to be able to utilize what the markets are doing today and utilize every single thing that's on your fingertips. And I've taken my game up to another level, obviously with recording this video, and then also with with Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube, anything that you can imagine. Number one book, and this kind of comes off as a pretty intense book, and I would say that this book probably isn't for anybody or everybody, but I recommend it to anyone and everyone. And it's for a couple reasons, but this book is absolutely phenomenal. It's called Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. And the reason why I recommend this as my number one book on Audible is that it's not just an audiobook. Most audiobooks are read by someone, or maybe it's the author and they just kind of read the pages, and they read paragraph by paragraph. And it's great. You get the whole content. You can speed it up, slow it down, whatever you need. This audiobook, however, is a combination of three things. It's a combination of an audiobook, a podcast, and a radio show. David Goggins isn't the one reading the book, but David Goggins is in the studio while the reader is reading the book, and David actually stops the reader a couple times throughout the book, quite a few times, to be able to talk about that experience that he was going through in his life, talk about the different scenarios that were going on, and being able to listen to his story, it really is incredibly empowering for a lot of people to be able to read, but then also it's super applicable towards a lot of people's lives, a lot of things that people are maybe going through or maybe haven't gone through yet, but it really prepares you for life. And I think it's really fascinating to be able to now read this book, but then also go on to a lot of the content that David Goggins has put out via YouTube, and be able to do a lot of research there and just figure out about this guy and figure out about a lot of the drive and motivation and different things and be able to apply it in a lot of different fields. That's my top 5. Hopefully this helps. If you have any other phenomenal audiobooks that you've listened to, not just read, but listened to, please comment down below. Like this video, share it out to your friends, anybody who loves reading. We'd love to be able to hear people's thoughts on those 5 and then any other favorites.